Well, welcome everyone to the British Society of Gerontology's special interest group on aging, business and society. Today we've got a great meeting lined up for you to talk about loneliness in later life, a national challenge or opportunity, depending on whether your glass is half full or half empty, with obvious human consequences. Next slide, please. What I'd like to do to begin with is just to do some basic housekeeping. So as you can gather, for those of you who have joined, the meeting is being recorded. And if you're unhappy with recording, please feel free to quit the meeting. We set aside a lot of time in this for panel discussion, Q&A. So I really hope there's an opportunity for everybody's voice to be heard, who wants to be heard. We have a chat function here, and it's customary for this group to introduce, so everybody who is in the audience to introduce themselves using the chat, if that's something you feel happy to do. We'd love to know your name. We'd love to know a bit about your interest in being here. Maybe you're here for business, maybe you're here for academic reasons, but please do let us know a little bit about you so that it can start conversations with other delegates. But equally, it helps us to gain some insight about who is joining and taking value from these meetings. It's a tight agenda today. We have a number of speakers due to present, so please do remain muted unless you are speaking yourself. And if you do have questions, please type them into the chat so that we can find your comments and make sure that they are presented to our speakers as we go. Next slide, please. Thought this might be a nice time just to tell you a little bit about the work of the British Society of Gerontology. We've been established since 2022. We're delighted to be here as a partner in this 2025 Longevity Week. Our mission is to facilitate collaboration between gerontology, business and society so that we can enable people to age independently through the life course and do the important things that gives their lives meaning. The SIG delivers value to its members. We have 600 members now. We're delighted by that amazing growth in our trajectory, by facilitating collaboration between gerontology, business and civil society, facilitating knowledge exchange through collaborative events, publications and outreach, and by, of course, leveraging the strength of this amazing growing network that we're developing here. And by fulfilling our mission, we'll hopefully be able to enhance the capacity of our stakeholders to address the obviously growing needs of an aging world, promote economic opportunities, and improve well-being and strengthen society's response to an aging population. You can see more of us or learn more about us by following the link to the BSG website, where there's a section on special interest groups with a lot of detail, and you can find all of our past reports sitting on that website too. So on to the topic today, which is loneliness in later life. I'm really keen not to steal the thunder of some of the amazing presenters that we have today, but at a very basic level, more than 3 million people in the UK aged over 65 live alone in England and Wales, and 1 in 5 in England say they have nobody to turn to if something goes wrong at home. And that's a key factor in institutionalization. People aged 65 and over who report severe loneliness are 4 times more likely to rely on paid or formal social care support, and older people who are chronically lonely are more than twice as likely to need GP or A&E support. And this increases pressure, obviously, on the NHS and makes aging in place much harder to sustain. Next slide. Loneliness increases the risk of early death by up to 26%. This is about comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Ongoing loneliness increases the risk of falls by around 30% due to reduced activity, poorer balance, lower confidence, all those factors creating core barriers to aging in place. And loneliness is associated with a 50% increased risk of developing dementia in some form or other, affecting the confidence and functional independence that is needed for people to remain at home. And beyond the individual who is maybe just identifying as a patient or in need of care, 1 in 3 carers aged 65 and over themselves report feeling lonely most of the time, data taken in 2023. So a lot of data there. I'm sure that the speakers will put this into much more context as we go through this event, but I just wanted to look at what is at stake for this conversation and for tackling this issue. Health and social care savings. Next slide, please. Reducing chronic loneliness could generate significant savings for the NHS and local authorities. It does this by lowering the risk of depression, dementia, hospital admissions that we've just talked about. Tackling loneliness enables older people to stay healthier, active, and economically engaged longer, improving workforce participation and reducing early retirement due to ill health. Data from the Centre for Aging Better, one of our members, presented in 2023. And obviously, stronger social connection builds civic trust, volunteering, and local spending. Data presented in 2023 by the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, where the Ministry for the Loneliness sits today. And then the final point I wanted to raise was about the business and innovation opportunity that this issue raises. As the UK population ages, demand is rising for products and services that support connection, participation, and independence. And so the need to facilitate exchange and engagement between aging demographics, academia, business, and society is higher than it's ever been before, and will continue to rise as this demographic trend continues. And so that is why we want to talk about this today, and that is what's at stake. And I'd like now to introduce our contributors for this event. So next slide, please. It's a real privilege to be able to introduce today 5 speakers who will talk on this topic from a variety of paradigms. Ruth Lowe is Head of Loneliness Services at Age UK and will speak first, to be followed by Professor Christina Victor, who's Professor of Gerontology and Public Health at Brunel. We're delighted that Cynthia Bullock, Director of Healthy Lives at Innovate UK, will be here to talk about the connecting aspects of loneliness and how Innovate UK is supporting projects that directly and indirectly tackle this. And then we're particularly delighted to introduce Stuart Andrew, who is the Shadow Secretary of State for Health and Social Care today, and we'll be joined on the panel by Fabian MP for Leeds North East, who is also the UK chair of the International Parliamentary Union, and we're delighted to have all of these contributors today. I'd like to just spend a moment just to talk about our objectives. We have 4 aims. Next slide, please. The first is to foster dialogue, obviously related to our mission between business, academia, and civil society on this conversation. It's important to us through this event, to elevate national awareness of loneliness in later life. It's an urgent and solvable issue. We'd like to examine its scale, its deep health and social consequences, and its increasing social and political relevance. We'd like to look at the complex and systemic drivers of loneliness among older people, including bereavement, digital exclusion, financial insecurity, health inequalities, housing, and the loss of social roles, by drawing on the latest evidence and lived experience. And finally, we'd like to highlight promising responses, innovations, and best practices across sectors, from healthcare and public policy to employer practice and research, that will help to identify and cover the gaps that remain. Next slide, please. I promise that I'm going to stop talking now, and I'd really like to introduce our first expert, Ruth Lowe, Head of Loneliness Services at Age UK.
Thanks, Rob. Hi, everyone.
Ruth.
Well, thank you. So yeah, I'm Head of Loneliness Services at Age UK, and I've worked at Age UK for about 14 years. working on our frontline services, supporting older people in various roles. So I'm really passionate about reducing loneliness in older people, and I'm delighted to be here today to speak to you about my experiences and the work Age UK does. Next slide, please. Oh, and next slide again, please. So I just wanted to briefly touch on what loneliness actually is. So loneliness is a completely natural human emotion. We're biologically wired to need social contact, and loneliness is our signal that we need more. So it's something we'll all experience throughout our lifetime, but unfortunately, as we get older, the risks of us becoming lonely and experiencing loneliness do seem to increase. A lot of recent research has focused on younger people and loneliness, with 16 to 24-year-olds being more likely to report feeling lonely than any other group. But I think it's really important that we don't forget the stigma that a lot of older people still feel around talking about their feelings of loneliness. We hear this a lot on our services, as well as the severity of loneliness that some older people experience compared to other groups. Next slide, please. So why are older people a group that are so at risk of loneliness? So loneliness is very much driven by circumstances, and these are just some of the risk factors that increase the chances of someone becoming lonely. So firstly, big life transitions. Older people often come to us for support when they've been bereaved, maybe they've retired or they've become a carer. These are times in our lives when we're more likely to become lonely and isolated. Physical and mental health difficulties, so mobility issues, visual issues, all of these things can make it harder to get out and about and form connections. And as we age, our social circles and support networks do tend to become smaller. Digital exclusion is also a huge issue for older people who aren't able to make the connections a lot of us enjoy online, as are financial difficulties, living on a low fixed income like a pension. So I think when you look at these risk factors, you can see why older people are a group that are so at risk. And then there's factors in our communities which just make things even harder. So lack of public transport, even things like public toilets not being open can make it so much harder for older people to get out and about. And over the last few years, things have become even more difficult for older people with the COVID lockdowns and now the cost of living crisis. A lot of older people are having to choose between heating and eating, so they certainly can't go out and do things they enjoy. Next slide, please. So this is the reality for older people. So I think it's quite hard for a lot of us to imagine going a whole week without speaking to a family member or a friend, but this is the reality of what we hear every day. So we speak to older people on our helplines who can't speak for very long because they're so, their voice is so out of practice that it's difficult for them. And we know that nearly 1 million older people in the UK are often lonely. So those older people are those that are experiencing chronic loneliness. So chronic loneliness is when we're persistently lonely for a long time. And when that goes on, it can start to have a really negative impact on someone's life. And that's why it's so important that older people aren't left out of the conversation on loneliness. Next slide, please. So the impacts of loneliness on an individual can be huge. It won't look exactly the same for any two people, but we know there are common ways it does tend to manifest. So firstly, it's not a mental health condition, but it does really impact upon our mental health, and it's closely linked with dementia, cognitive decline, and memory loss. It can have a huge impact on physical health, so it can make it so much harder to look after ourselves and manage a health condition. And it's also linked with a 32% increase in having a stroke. That's just one example. People who are experiencing loneliness often stop taking care of themselves or their homes, and we sometimes hear that people misuse drugs and alcohol as well. And it can bring up so many negative thoughts and feelings, so people can feel like there's no point to their existence. They can feel completely invisible. And when people are chronically lonely for a long period, they can become trapped in this vicious cycle of loneliness. So because they're lonely, their health deteriorates, which makes it even harder to form connections. Hence they become more lonely, and it can be really difficult when someone is in one of those cycles to reach out and get them to get the right support. Next slide, please. But the good news is that Age UK is here for older people. So we provide services locally and nationally. So we've got our telephone friendship service where we match older people with a volunteer to have a regular friendly chat every week. And we have some really beautiful friendships form on that service. Some of them are lasting over a decade. We've also got our Silverline helpline where an older person could call in 24 hours a day whenever they're feeling lonely. And we get a lot of older people who call that service first thing in the morning and last thing at night. They look over in bed and their partner of 50 or 60 years is gone and they've got no one to say good morning or good night to, so they say it to us. We've also got a network of local age UK partners who provide a wide range of services to reduce loneliness for older people, things like dance classes, social groups and lunch clubs. We're really lucky to have some great partnership work with businesses who fund lots of our programmes and work. Just one example is we're working with Brunel at the moment, who fund our Home Sweet Home programme to provide services to older people, but we do so much more together. So just one thing we've done with them is helping to make their stores more age-friendly and welcoming spaces for older people. We've also had great success with our corporate volunteering programmes, especially through our telephone friendship service. And Age UK also campaigns, researches and influence on loneliness. Loneliness is such a huge part of everything we do. And we've recently published a report where we're calling for joint up action across the public, private, health and social care sectors to help us address the loneliness challenge. Loneliness isn't impossible to solve. And I've seen myself over the years, the huge difference that can be made, even when someone is really chronically lonely, with the right support and services, older people's lives can be transformed. We hear so many stories every day where that's happened. These are just a few quotes I've got here. And because I'm limited to time, I was just going to share one very small anecdote. So I heard just a few weeks ago about a lady who calls our Silverline helpline, and she told us it's the absolute highlight of her day. And before the call, even though she can't see the volunteer or staff member that's answering the phone, she always puts on her lipsticks. It makes her feel so special. So I just wanted to finish on that. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Ruth. I just want to make sure if anybody in the audience wants to type any questions in, we're collecting questions as we go. So if you have any questions for Ruth, please let us have them. Ruth, that was a brilliant presentation. Thank you so much for, such an inspiring and insightful delivery. What a lot of interesting stuff you're doing. I've just come back from a conference in Manchester, which is one of the UN cities promoting leading in healthy aging. And I was struck by some of the simplicity of some of the solutions that are being offered to tackle loneliness, one of which was the addition of the bench to local areas, and the fact that people can, form relationships, speak to people. Is everything that simple? Or what do you think about the level of complexity required to solve this?
I mean, sometimes it is just the simple things. And one of the things that I think makes the biggest difference is having those age-friendly spaces and communities that are welcome to everyone, not just older people. I think things like, chatty cafes, bench initiatives, just those small things can make a big difference. And for somebody who is feeling lonely, it can have such a big impact on their feelings of confidence and self-worth. So I also think anything where it doesn't necessarily feel too structured. Some people don't respond well to befriending, and they prefer something where they feel they can go along and give something themselves, or it's a bit more informal. So I'd say it's different for everyone, but I certainly think that there's a lot of things we could do within our communities, not just for older people, but for everyone, to make them friendly and more welcoming spaces.
Fantastic. Well, I hope that we get some more questions for you, and we'll come back to them through the panel. But I would like to move on to our next presenter, if that's okay. And our next speaker is Professor Christina Victor, Professor of Gerontology and Public Health at Brunel. And apologies on the slide for my deliberate mistake there. I should have said Brunel. I apologise. For some reason, I had an earworm of Swansea.
I was an undergraduate at Swansea University.
Oh, okay. My apologies. I'm glad at least I got a little bit of it right.
Yeah.
Christina, over to you.
Yeah, I would be so delighted to be a professor at Swansea. I couldn't be more flattered if you tried. So I'm sorry if I look like a prisoner in some kind of detention camp. I'm actually at a conference in Boston, and this is the only quiet space I could find. So bear with me. I might take a slightly different tack. Obviously, I'm an academic, so that means I have no understanding of the real world and how we do things. So I want to talk a little bit about what we think we know about loneliness people, where our evidence gaps are, and perhaps be slightly more controversial. So if I could have the next slide, please. Okay, so I've been interested in loneliness and isolation since I read Peter Townsend's book, The Family Life of Old People. And then there were about 3 people in the world who were interested in loneliness, and that interest has spiraled since I first read that book. So I think where we get interested in loneliness is that it is one of the pillars of the WHO definition of health. Health is good physical, mental, and social health. So that's my take on it. And we've already had mention of the 15 cigarettes a day thing. And it's seen as being the cause of numerous diseases, and is a source of significant additional health service use. And I just think we need to be slightly skeptical about some of that evidence, because so much of it is based on cross-sectional data. So loneliness and dementia are correlated, but you don't know, are people lonely because they've got dementia and they can't communicate, or is it loneliness that causes dementia? So I think we need to be cautious about drawing causation. And I think the loneliness field is particularly redolent with the kind of quote that I've got at the bottom. This is from the WHO Commission on Social Connections, saying 1 billion people, adults, experience loneliness. There are 100 deaths every hour. And I think some of these statistics may well be, well, it would be interesting to see how they were generated. And the loneliness field is particularly linked with the statement at the bottom. Globally, there are 870, anyway, a lot of deaths, sorry, around about 1 million deaths, let's call it that, every year. Sorry, jet lag. But that's only impressive when you tell us it's 1 million. It's less impressive when we know there are 65 million deaths a year, and this is just one cause. So I think we need to be critical in the sense of evaluative of some of the evidence that we're given. And if I could have the next slide, please. So again, we already are, we've already had mention, older people are not the loneliest group in the population. It is in fact young adults. And from some work my colleagues and I have done with the BBC Loneliness Survey, we know that most older people have experienced loneliness before by the time they arrive at old age. And I think one of the things that we do, perhaps as academics, I'm sure practitioners don't, we're rather naive, and we think, oh, they're lonely when they're old, and not thinking and perhaps asking them, have they experienced loneliness at other periods of their life? What were their coping strategies? So when we thought about interventions, we think it would be a great idea to do this or that or the other, without perhaps asking the experts by experience, older adults, what do you do when you suffer this? If I could have the next slide, please. I think as well, our data only asks about frequency of loneliness, but with my colleague Pam Qualter and Manuela Barreto, we've done some work looking at the different other dimensions. So loneliness can be experienced in terms of the frequency, in terms of the duration, and in terms of the intensity. And when we did our analysis, we find that duration of loneliness shows a distinct patterning, whereas frequency and intensity kind of cluster together, which links back to our first speaker of thinking about chronic loneliness. And I'd be interested in the data, because most of our evidence asks about loneliness now. It doesn't ask about chronicity. So if I could have the next slide, please. This is some work that I've done with some colleagues at Brunel, but I take entire responsibility for the interpretation of data. So this is data based upon following up, and this is people aged 50 and over, through 4 waves of data collection of the Understanding Society survey. And so people were asked if they were lonely at each time point. And so using this kind of analysis, we could look at the temporal patterning of loneliness. So we can see most people, however many times you ask them, are not lonely. We have a group around about 15% who are lonely at just one period. So if we use our analogy with health and illness, that's a bit like an acute attack from which a self-limiting episode from which they've recovered. Then we have a group of people who I think are potentially the ones we should be focusing on, are those who are chronically lonely. They are lonely at every time point. So perhaps one thing we need to think about in our discussions is not just how we define loneliness, but what we mean by chronicity and whether that's a useful thing. And then, of course, as with all activities with people, there's an annoying group who can't make their mind up. These are people who have fluctuating loneliness. And again, that might be a different kind of population and may need different interventions. So I think the argument I'm trying to construct is that loneliness is not a homogeneous experience, but has temporal dimensions. And if we're thinking about policy practice, we probably need to differentiate those and the consequences. If I can have the next slide, please. So this was it. That was it from me. I think loneliness is important. I see there's a question. The accepted definition of loneliness is the gap between the social relationships you have and the social relationships you like, and that can be either in terms of the mode of the engagement, the frequency, and other areas. So it's a gap between what you want and what you would really like. So I think it is important to say something's prevalence has not increased for older people since 1948. If we want to do things about loneliness, there isn't a screening test. I really am not sure that loneliness causes poor health outcomes, but I'm absolutely happy to discuss it. I think where we do have a major problem is the evidence about interventions. There are at least 5 or 6 systematic reviews, and there's a new one that's just come out from Lasgard, which I think is important for us to take note of. And they say, while that some studies suggest that loneliness interventions are effective, actually the certainty of evidence, so how confident are we in finding, are regarded as low to very low. So if I had 2 requests of the academic community, but also the wider community, it's first of all thinking about what type of loneliness are we trying to address, and again, it's thinking about better studies to determine what would work for whom, under what circumstances, why does it work, how long does it last, and actually at what cost. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much for your time. And yeah, here's my usual
thank
question.
you. Thank you, Christina, so much. That was such an insightful presentation and really interesting to hear. I see that there are a lot of hands going up, and really I think the crux of what you're saying is there's a sweet spot for us to really get our teeth into here.
We've been too I'm sorry, I've got hands like a kind of mafia leader. We have not been precise enough, I think, in what we're trying to do and who we're trying to do it to. With, sorry, not very well expressed.
I'm going to go to the chat and pull in a couple of the questions that people have asked. And Ruth, I don't want you to feel forgotten. I will get back to you with a couple of questions that are here for you too. But before we get into that, just in terms of the the waterfall that you presented that went through from not lonely through to chronically lonely. So you have that declining, if you like, epidemiology there. My question is there a direction to that as well? I mean, so could you, for example, look at the transitory and say that there is a preventive element, or they are likely to become chronic, or am I misunderstanding that?
I was abiding by
You're on.
good practice. Yeah, so I'm talking to myself, who is my favourite audience, of course. I think our research is not really investigated these things. My instinct is that the transient group who have one episode of loneliness seem to be different from the chronic stroke fluctuating. We haven't yet been able to really investigate that in any depth. This is only something we've done fairly recently. But my instinct would be, let's say, for example, an acute episode of loneliness might be you've had an illness or something, some kind of episode of some time that has disrupted your social health, but has actually, it's self-limiting and it's righted itself. The chronic ones, I think, are potentially people who have multiple challenges, and we should not forget the structural health inequalities around poverty, deprivation, the access to the infrastructure that promotes the engagement. So changes in bus routes. I once did a project in East Anglia and asked people what would solve their loneliness, and they all said taxi passes, because there were no buses. So, chronic loneliness can be not just the loss of personal things, but those structural factors as well. And the fluctuating group, I think I would be speculating, but it's probably a bit of both. But it may be that they require different solutions. And that might
Absolutely.
be why some.
I'm just going to try to synthesize, because Christina, if it's okay, I'd just like to try to synthesize 3 questions that have popped up on the chat. One is Jay Clark, another is Jane Lord, and the third is Francesca Valli. And I apologize to all 3 of you because I'm trying to pull these questions together, but I think that they're 3 questions that are binary. They're basically, which is better, interaction, telephone versus face-to-face? How do you manage the tensions of rural versus urban? And what do you have to say about the idea that not receiving access is kind of exclusionary? I'm just going to check that third question.
So in the UK,
Francesca, would you like to?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you like, I can do a quick intervention. Thank you, Rob. Professor Christina Victor, I just love your delivery. What I get is the fact that we need to understand a bit more about this loneliness, this supposed loneliness that older people suffer from or are impacted by. And I think that's a very interesting insight. We all assume loneliness, older people, and you're done. It's not quite so simple, is it?
It is the job of a researcher to make the seemingly simple much more complicated than you could ever imagine. So otherwise nobody sees we have a role. Yeah, I think it is complicated, and I think if you say there are 5% of let's say older people in, I happen to be in Boston at the moment. In Boston are lonely. That group consists of people for whom it's an acute attack will go. It's a chronic, enduring thing, and it's something that's fluctuating. We really need, I think, to understand those differences in order to be able to decide where we need to intervene and how we need to intervene. And I think the
absolutely.
Other thing, yeah, and that could be in a whole variety of ways. And it's also about, remember that loneliness you have to understand what is the root of the individual's loneliness. So, and it can be the quantity of your relations. I used to know a load of people, everybody that I know is dead. I just want to know more people, which is different from my somebody who perhaps suffers from emotional loneliness from the loss of a spouse. You could give them 100 people, but that doesn't replace that one person. And so I think as well, we need to understand a bit more what's going on in order to tailor the solution. And we're not, you know, it's like everything else, personalised medicine, personalised loneliness interventions. So my
Thank
mother
you.
was actually the beneficiary of Age UK befriending service, which proved to be, yeah, an interesting experience. Take off.
I'm gonna, if it's okay,
Yeah,
I'm gonna just.
Yeah.
We need to move on a little bit. So if it's okay, I'd like to invite Cynthia, Cynthia Bullock from Innovate UK, to speak. She's going to give a perspective from the Innovate UK. Cynthia, I know that this has been a little fraught experience for you, so I'm just checking you're here.
No,
Thank you so much. I know that you've been through hell and high water to get here, so
Uh,
I appreciate.
no, I made it. Sorry, let me just sort that out. Yeah, so at least my background looks vaguely professional. Thank you, Rob, for the chance to speak to the group. So, I feel like I need to say this just in case there is that one person in the audience going, who, where is she from? So thank you for the invitation, obviously, and the opportunity to speak and be part of the panel this evening. So I work at Innovate UK. Innovate UK is the UK's innovation agency. We're part of a much larger organization called UK Research and Innovation, which is a non-departmental public body sponsored by the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. And so Innovate UK's aim is to enable businesses to grow by helping them to develop and commercialize new products, services, processes, that sort of thing. So my contribution to the discussion is with that lens, and I think it's important to set that. So I'm not a researcher. I mean, I was a molecular biologist way back, but certainly not doing any research in this space. So it's with that sort of innovation support lens. Helpfully, colleagues like Christina and others have effectively articulated the challenge with loneliness, both in the general sense, but also with respect to loneliness in later life. For Innovate UK, our involvement is largely in the form of research and innovation support for several loneliness-focused solutions through a combination of competitive funding, some partnerships, some sort of technology-driven programs specifically aimed at improving a whole host of things, right? So things like mental health or mental fitness, social connections, and community well-being. A key investment in this space is the £98 million Healthy Aging Challenge, which aimed to enable businesses, but including social enterprises, to develop and deliver products and services to enable people to age well and remain active, productive, independent, and socially connected for as long as possible. The great news is, on the back of that investment, we have sought to broaden the sort of aims of our program, such that the idea of the life course really does run through much more than I would say it did under the Healthy Aging Challenge. That was very much focused at the over 50s. I think everything we've learned, and others like Michael Marmot would argue that actually the kind of social determinants of health start in much earlier years, and therefore that's when you should be intervening. So we've sought to broaden things to include the life course. We've also sought to make mental well-being and mental health a much more explicit aim of the program. So and started looking at other sort of cardiometabolic and multimorbidity areas like obesity and nutrition. On the back of that, we made some investments around supporting community resilience solutions through scaling community initiatives in diet, exercise, management. We've also funded quite a lot of digital self-management tools through sort of previous programs like our Digital Health Catalyst and current programs like the Biomedical Catalyst program. Currently, actually, on that later one, we have an open call at the moment. It's a £25 million call. It's got very broad scope and includes the development of digital health technologies as well as consumer-focused self-care products would also be in scope for funding. It's a very, very popular scheme, and it's only been open for about two days, and we've already got about 100 applications. So just to give you an idea of how popular that is. Recent investments we've made in this space include Mindset. So our Mindset program is seeking to help develop digital mental health therapeutic solutions. So bringing expertise from the creative industries, XR technology to help develop solutions in the healthcare market. It was a £20 million pilot program, and I'm certainly really keen to try and move that forward. So it is one of the areas that I would see as a priority area for investment going forward with any SR allocations for us. Some of the examples of solutions that's come through Mindset are things like immersive platforms for trauma recovery or addiction support or social reintegration, those sorts of things. Projects that target conditions linked to isolation or just generalized anxiety disorders or school avoidance or depression. The innovations themselves, the aim for us is now to try and see how we might scale them where we think they are gaining traction, and it was helpful to work with a support partner in the Health Innovation Network South London, part of the SLAM Mental Health Trust, which has been really, really helpful to help sort of bring expertise around regulation, health economics, and also sort of access to clinical support. From our perspective, one of the things we've tried to do is really push innovators to think about how they reach the sort of underserved populations. So it isn't just a solution for the few, but really looking at that kind of population health angle and the health inequalities that we know persist in the system. And at Innovate, we've sought to support sort of hopefully purpose-driven digital platforms as well that foster kind of real-world social interactions. And these tools are designed to try and bridge the gap between sort of online engagement and genuine human interaction, because we think that's really, really important. You need a blend of both, such that you're able to follow someone in the event that either is driven by preference or actually driven by severity of acute incidences. What else did I want to say? I've mentioned the sort of community-based, community empowering aspect to the investments that we've sought to make in this space. A lot of it brings in the kind of housing came in on the back of some conversations around housing. So designing spaces that promote interactions, embedding social connection principles into urban planning and regeneration is another sort of aspect that we've invested in within our portfolio. And these sort of align with broader goals to design out loneliness in cities. I recognize that. We funded co-living housing models and community housing innovations that seek to reduce urban isolation. And really, for us, it's very much about cross-sector collaboration and seeking to embed the voice of people with lived experience in a kind of co-creation, assessment, award decision. So we have people with lived experience in our award assessment panels, and they have an equal voice and an equal vote in the things that we fund. And we think that that's really important. So yeah, I'll just end by saying clearly it's a key challenge. And one that everyone I feel has a role to play across industry, public sector, and academia to ensure that we've got the research base, like Christina was talking about, to really drive the sorts of investments that we make and to drive the sorts of things that we ultimately back. And I personally think that the priorities that we are working towards align really well with the NHS effort to try and reduce loneliness as a kind of public health concern challenge. Yeah, so I'll end there. Thank you.
Brilliant, Cynthia. Thank you so much. And yeah, I really want to say what a very interesting and helpful presentation that was. And I would just say that I think you were quite cautious in trying not to connect some of these dots too directly. But from where I'm standing, you're in exactly the right place in terms of, you know, being able to support this, even if it's not directly a specific focal point, it's clearly going to benefit from the things that you were talking about around digital and social and built environments and so on.
No, absolutely. I agree with that.
Maybe bang the drum a bit.
Yeah, well, because I totally I do agree with Christina that clearly there are multifaceted reasons for why someone might say they're lonely, and all forms of loneliness do not mean the same thing necessarily to the same people. So for me, I'm a great believer in trying to engineer choice in this context, so that people have the ability to feel empowered to choose the solutions that work best for them, be it rural, be it urban, be it peer-to-peer, be it whatever that looks like for the individual. I think that personalized aspect is really, really important. Yeah, so that's hopefully what we're trying to do. And I'm hoping they give me more money to do that more.
I mean, there's a lot going on here, and it's a great story. And you know, congratulations! Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And let's hope to see you again at the next event, and you can tell us a bit more about it. And
Definitely.
I'm going to move on if it's okay, Cynthia. We've got a panel,
Fine.
and I'm really keen to protect that time. And so it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Shadow Secretary of State for Health, Stuart Andrew, MP for Daventry. Formerly, this is the Week of Children in Need, formerly the home of MP at the Home of Children in Need, if I remember rightly, Stuart, many, many years ago. You were MP for Pudsey Bear. Well, MP for Pudsey. I won't say anything sillier than that, I promise. But the reason we've invited Stuart today was because he was one of the first ministers for loneliness. And actually, obviously, we know there's been a change in government. Stuart has now become the Shadow Secretary of State for Health. Actually, it gives him maybe a different lens to talk about this issue as well. And so I don't want to just talk about this from your perspective as a former Minister of Health. I think there's a lot of insight and interesting conversation to be had from you now. And Stuart, I'm not going to do a lot of introduction, so if you would like, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Rob. And let me start by saying it really is a real pleasure to join you all this evening, not least because I think this is a welcome opportunity to ensure that we keep the pace going on this issue, because it really is so important. You know, I think I want to reflect that I think we should be quite proud in the UK about our standing on this issue. We have been world leaders on it, and I think that is fantastic. And, you know, I'm just really keen that we sort of maintain that. I think it is worth sort of reflecting a bit where politically where this sort of came from. And of course, it was Jo Cox who talked about her experience of loneliness going to university, you know, going from a village in West Yorkshire down to Oxford and not knowing anybody and feeling that social isolation. And sadly, obviously, as we know, Jo was taken from us far too soon. But Rachel Reeves, who's a Labour MP, and Seema Kennedy carried on her work as a Conservative MP, carried on. And the reason I mention that is I think it just shows that a lot of this work has been born out of cross-party working. And that's not, you know, people don't see that happening a lot in Parliament. They'll see the, you know, the to and fro in the chamber. But I think it's really important to say that. And I am glad that, you know, so much has been done. As you rightly say, 2018, the UK was the first country in the world to appoint a minister for loneliness, and at that same time was the first to deliver a cross-government strategy for tackling loneliness. And then I was really privileged to be appointed to that role. Now, I have to say, at the time, it was something I was really interested in focusing on. But I had a wide range of portfolios at the time, not least sport, civil society, gambling. I was even the Eurovision minister and the coronation minister. But that aside, what I suddenly thought about was that some of the other portfolio things I had, like civil society, like communities, like sport, actually going to be the things that might help us tackle loneliness as well. So it sort of fitted really, really well in that time. Now, in that role, I took over the responsibility for us doing the cross-government ministerial meetings. Now, if anybody's been in cross-government ministerial meetings, some of them can be quite tedious, if I'm being really honest. But in this space, I have to say, they were the most engaging, the most interesting, because all of the ministers came with real personal reflections, and they weren't just reading out the script from the department, they were actually advocating for things that they wanted to see their department do. And that really helped us then to feed that into the strategy updates that we were doing, and ensuring that in all policies that each department were developing, they were thinking about loneliness as part of what that policy was aiming to do. So we just heard a moment ago about, you know, there were other departments like the Department for Housing and Local Government, for example. They were talking about how do we get better social spaces in our planning policy so that there are places for people to meet, even if it is that bench in the park or a community centre or whatever it may be. But that was very much integrated. Again, DWP thinking about people who are unemployed and that being a trigger for loneliness, and of course working with education on young people. But that strategy also, I think, helped to bring together not just what government can do, but what we do in partnership. And I think that for me is the strongest part of the strategy, because it's not, government can't do this on its own. It has to be a partnership between the public, private, charitable sectors, and that's what we saw a lot of. We saw investment from all of those, bringing in about £80 million to try and bring about projects. And I think one of the ones that really sticks in my mind was the Know Your Neighbourhood Fund, where I went up to Hull. Age UK were running that. And what was amazing was seeing older people who had become quite isolated from their communities in which they'd lived for a very long time, but the community was developing much faster than their connections were keeping up with. And what they did brilliantly was they were getting people of all ages coming together. And I think sitting in that room and watching those intergenerational relationships develop was really inspiring, because the young people were saying to me that they were learning a lot about the community in which they lived, and older people were saying they're learning about how to use a mobile phone from that young person. And that interconnection I thought was just fantastic. But another key part of the strategy that we were developing was about research. You know, what is loneliness in the first place? We've just heard that from a couple of presentations. It's really hard to actually quantify it, to explain it, to understand that feeling that you might be feeling, understanding in the first place that might be loneliness. You might not know that. And so that was really important. The other thing was, as you've already heard, this isn't something that is suffered by just a single age group. I think a lot of people assume it's just older people that feel lonely. The research showed us that there are many factors that involve people becoming lonely for a variety of reasons. Older groups, you know, sometimes more impacted by their work status or relationships. Younger people, because they go through lots of transition in quite a short period of time. You know, they go from school to sixth form college to university, or into the workplace, sometimes often moving away. And those are often triggers. People with disabilities often will find themselves feeling isolated. And so all of this was really helpful for us to try and understand what are those triggers, what is loneliness. But it also highlighted to us that there is a massive issue with stigma. You know, stigma is one of the big things that people will face. It's a big hurdle. And I remember at the time we were thinking about how we're going to tackle this issue about stigma. And it suddenly dawned on me that as the Minister for Loneliness, if we're going to talk about stigma, then I've got to be open about my experience of loneliness. And so I did a series of interviews of, you know, where were the moments in which I'd felt particularly lonely. One was when I first came out, because I lived in a very, very, very rural area and it was quite hard. And I spoke about that. The second was when I first became a member of Parliament, because suddenly I'd come from, you know, up north down to Westminster, and I was in this great big palace of Westminster, and I felt completely on my own. But what was amazing is the response to those articles. I was getting letters from all over the world, people saying, I'm glad you talked about this. You know, I now understand that, you know, that's what I'm feeling. I feel brave enough to go and talk to people, that's what I was sort of suffering with. And then out of that, we came up with these campaigns, you know, to sort of really try and end that, if you like, those experiences of loneliness. We wanted to reframe it. We wanted to try and remove those sort of negative connotations to loneliness. We wanted to focus campaigns on different age groups, whether that be freshers' fairs for young people. I did a meeting in Number 10 with a load of social media influencers. They'd spoken a language I didn't understand, but they were reaching about 8.7 million people. And then older people, as I say, that amazing scheme up in Hull and many others like it, and in rural areas particularly. And then we also set up the Tackling Loneliness Hub, which brought together people from the public sector, from the private sector, from the charity sector, all sharing their experiences about what has worked for them. And this has really triggered a lot of international interests. And, you know, we had visits from Sweden, from Japan, from the US, wanting to know what we had been doing. Now, in the role that I'm in now, I still want to advocate for, you know, how we tackle loneliness. And there are things like building on social prescribing. I think GPs have a really important role to refer people to opportunities that exist within their communities for those social interactions. And there have been about 5.5 million referrals now, which is great. And also, how do we work with the private sector? The all-party group here did a really interesting report about how you can be in the workplace and still feel lonely. You can be in a crowded room and still feel isolated. And some of the recommendations coming out of that were really, really important. But I think, look, you know, we're always learning. And I think that was the thing I found in my time. I'm still learning about it. You know, what we've heard from presentations today is every time you ask a question, it seems to bring out another series of questions that we need to try and find answers to. And as we go forward, I want to continue my work with my fellow Shadow Cabinet colleagues to make sure that we've got loneliness going through all of the policies that we develop, including, you know, doing even more on planning, for example. How do we do better housing for older people, where community is really at the heart of it. America does some of this very well. Australia does this very well. We seem to think that we'll just, you know, build a few blocks and put all the old people in one place. Whereas, you know, what else is happening for those social interactions? So, you know, my reflection was that it was a fascinating issue. It was really complex. It's not an easy one. But I think there's a tremendous amount of work we should still be doing. And I'm really glad you're holding the session today.
Well, thank you so much, Stuart. I mean, that's a model of leadership, and such a delight to be able to hear your testimony and the experience that you've had. And I notice here the many claps and applauses going up the screen. So I feel like I'm speaking for the entire room, and to say thank you for everything you did, and thank you for your advice and insight for where we go from here. I also saw, and I have a limited view of, like everybody else, what people can see on screen, but I saw John Longden in the audience. Now, I've tried desperately to get John into this meeting as a speaker, but it didn't quite work out. But he's very kindly joined us today. John looks after a pub in the north, or well, maybe John, could you just explain to the audience who you are and what you do before we get into the panel? And I'd very much like it if you could say your piece on the panel too. You're on mute. There you are. Oh, we still can't hear him.
Can you hear me?
Turn it
Can
up.
you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Right, my apologies. I'm coming to you from the wilds of North Yorkshire. So up near Pateley Bridge in Nidderdale. So that's isolation and loneliness. Wave your hand, Rob, if I go, because the sheep come across the field and take away the reception up here. The name is John Longden. I'm the Chief Executive of Pub is a Hub. Pub is a Hub was founded 24 years ago from a challenge from the then Prince of Wales, now the King, that rural services were dropping to bits. Could publicans, particularly in rural... Could you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Sorry, I'm sorry. I just saw Fabian Hamilton arrive, and I was just waving to him. I apologise.
Well, look, what I insist is when I'm doing a presentation, I do insist that you all smile and have a laugh, because I am representing the pub industry here, really. And it's that warm, welcoming environment that you get from a publican. And so we formed following a challenge by the then Prince of Wales of could local pubs provide local services, and we formed Pub is a Hub. And since then, in 2018, we also formed Join In Last Orders for Loneliness. And that was because through Pub is a Hub, we were providing local services like a village store, like a community cafe, like allotments, IT training. But through our Join In Last Orders for Loneliness, we've been providing theatre performances, supporting community gardens, creating craft centres, craft boxes for locals to meet up, say, every Tuesday night to learn how to paint, how to draw, how to knit, whatever suits them. And that was brought about by somebody saying that they'd recently been bereaved and how lonely it was in the Yorkshire Dales in winter, that you closed the curtains at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and you didn't see anybody till 9 o'clock the next morning, and what a lonely life that was. And it's also a way of getting publicans to engage with what some of your speakers have said earlier. And I'm sorry I'm, as ever, running late, so I didn't join you till about 10 to 6. So I probably missed the presentations. Great presentation from you, Stuart, and must share more information, because what we found with Join In Last Orders for Loneliness is the craft boxes certainly have brought people together, but also we will now develop almost an informal village hall that can be used for all sorts of community activities and groups to get together in that warm, welcoming environment of pub. As far as we're concerned, it's nothing to do with drink. My favorite drink's ginger beer, just to shatter your illusions. But it's that warm, welcoming environment that a good publican can provide, particularly in rural areas where there are 14,000 rural pubs, and 85% of those rural pubs are SMEs, they're run as individual businesses. So what you find is that the publican will say to you, I live in the pub, but actually when I look around the area, I have to live the pub and live the pub to suit the local people. So we measure what we do in creating a project through social value. And we've just finished a social value report in September of what work we have done in the last 3 years or so since COVID. And we run ourselves on the basis, as has come out from the social value report. You can get it from our Pub is a Hub website. For every pound that we invest, we're creating £8.28 of local social value. Now that social value obviously is intangible, but it's a help to any government initiatives of doing all those intangible values, which is why we get so worked up about loneliness. So we measure what we do and we invest. Now, one of the interesting features is that comes out is a title that was in the Times recently of more pensioners are coming out of retirement to combat loneliness. You might have touched on it. But we have 12 advisors for Pub is a Hub, stretching from Scotland now right down to Wales, and we have representation in Northern Ireland as well. If I dare say so, all the advisors are of a certain age, as you will see looking at my grey hair, but we all do it because we enjoy giving something back into society. We all work for free because what we want to do is any fundraising that we can raise goes into projects and not into our lifestyles. And we've been going now for 24 years, 25 years next year. And what you will find is particularly the activities that are provided to overcome loneliness means that everybody not only is putting something back in, but one of your speakers before was saying, you're creating that community resilience. And when we measured social value, we actually found that the join-in last orders for loneliness projects were coming in way over £9 for every pound. When you averaged it out across our services, that's why it dropped to £8.28. So it's everybody collaborating.
It's amazing
together,
value.
everybody collaborating together to create social value of bringing harmony and showing a sense as well, which is what we're missing out in society now, that local people's lives, local people do matter. And many of the things, the mega things we do are really not relevant to up here in the Dales. You know, the investment in a runway at Gatwick Airport has no relevance to loneliness in the Dales, but we do need to all work, all collaborate together.
John, I'm so grateful that you came to this conversation today. One of the reasons I really wanted you to be in this meeting was I've seen that social impact report and I think it's a piece of beauty. It is a case study in how to write a social impact report. And I'd love it if you were to give us permission to forward this to the members of the group,
Yes.
You know, who are on the call today, so that when we send it with the report, I'd love it if we could send that out. So thank you very much for that. If it's okay, I'm going to swiftly move on because I aware acutely that I'm running out of time here and I do want to get to some group discussion. I see the lovely Fabian Hamilton is in the room. I'm acutely also aware that this is, as a Lancastrian, this is turning into a bit of a Yorkshire mafia. So I apologise to everybody who's from the northwest that we're taking our leadership from the east. Just a little bit of a joke there. But yeah, with that in mind, I'd like to introduce you to Fabian Hamilton. He's MP for Leeds North East. I think, Fabian, it's fair to say that you've been a long-standing colleague of Stuart's. You two know each other very, very well from years of collaboration behind the scenes. And one of the things I'm really pleased to tell you about today, because Fabian, you've been late getting into the meeting, is Stuart was so complimentary about the collaborative cross-party working that takes place on this topic. And I thought that was a really strong message. And so with that in mind, please let us know your thoughts on this topic, and just also to mention that the if I remember, you're the president of the it might not be the right title, but the Interparliamentary Group Union, which is this great big cross-party, cross-political network that works all the way around the world. And if we're going to be able to lever our leadership in loneliness, having Fabian on side to help us is a really good thing to have. So Fabian, over to you.
Well, Rob, thank you very much for inviting me. I hope you can hear me okay. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the computer to work, so I'm on my iPhone. It's not as good as a computer, and I apologize for being late. I was on time, but I couldn't actually get logged in. And as you saw, I logged in on the wrong piece of software. So enough apologies already. Firstly, just to say, I chair the British group of the Interparliamentary Union. It's the world's oldest multilateral organization, founded in 1889 to protect the rights of democracies, parliamentarians, individual members of parliament across the world. And we have 182 countries who are members. So it's been going a long time. It's like a cross between a trade union and the United Nations. But look, you've asked me to talk about loneliness. We've all suffered from loneliness at times in our lives. And as the last speaker said, as you get older, it gets worse. So what are we going to do about it? Well, firstly, just to pay tribute to Stuart Andrew, who was actually, the reason I knew him so well was because he was my local MP. I lived in his constituency for many, many years. In fact, I think it was 14 years. I seem to have lost you. No, you're there. So that's how I know Stuart. And congratulations, really, to Stuart on being the Shadow Health Secretary, because that is no mean job, frankly, in any party. So what are we doing? Well, we, like the previous government, take this pretty seriously. In 2018, there was a cross-government strategy. The Labour Party in government has now continued to support the Department for Culture, Media and Sport-led Tackling Loneliness programme, which now operates with stronger cross-departmental links. Sorry about my croaky voice, I've had laryngitis. And it's working, DCMS is working closely with the Department of Health and Social Care to embed loneliness considerations into health and social care planning, and with the Department for Work and Pensions to ensure employment and welfare policies recognise the role of social connection in well-being. And this includes, of course, integrating loneliness into social prescribing pathways, expanding community-based interventions, for example, and encouraging employers to adopt workplace practices that reduce isolation. There are a number of other things that we've done which I can elaborate on, but I wanted to just draw your attention, if I may, Rob, to the current impact that we believe, and that the government generally believes, loneliness actually has on health. Because tackling loneliness isn't just about improving individual lives. It's about transforming the health system, the economy, and our communities. And I think the evidence is really clear. Loneliness has serious consequences for physical and mental health, and it costs the NHS millions, weakens our social fabric as well. And if we reduce loneliness, the benefits would be profound. So, for example, the current impact of loneliness increases the risk of coronary heart disease by 29% and stroke by 32%. I don't know if you've had these stats already, so stop me if you already know this. Persistent, loneliness raises dementia risk by 25%, and social isolation can increase dementia risk by up to 50%. That's staggering, actually. It's also linked to significantly higher all-cause mortality. Persistent isolation increases cardiovascular mortality by 53%. 9 in 10 older people who are often lonely report being unhappy or depressed, and loneliness can be as harmful as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. I mean, that is just unbelievable. If we can reduce loneliness, then we can lower the rates of heart disease, stroke, dementia, mental health conditions, and early mortality. And of course, we can improve well-being and resilience across all age groups. The other thing, just to say, Rob, because I know you want to get other speakers and questions in, is just the economic impact. Because the current impact it's been calculated by government, of loneliness per individual. They incur £850 to £900 more in annual NHS costs than non-lonely people, owing to higher GP visits and hospital care. And if we can reduce this loneliness, significant savings for the NHS will be made, and as well as social care budgets. Now, improved productivity and workforce well-being, reducing absenteeism and boosting economic output. So these are all the benefits of reduction. I've got a lot more I can say, but I'm aware you're short of time. If you want me to carry on, I can.
Stuart, but I really appreciate. I think you've given us a good set of stats there, and I really appreciate the comments you made about the collaborative nature of this. I think that this is going to take a village to solve, and you know, it certainly isn't you know, a sort of ragtag binary issue that we want to be arguing about in the political fray, so to speak. So I really appreciate the collaborative spirit that you've come to this conversation with. So the panel is here. We have this amazing array of people, and only 15 minutes. And in the audience, we've got some mega stars as well who haven't. I mean, I'm just looking at we've got members of our leadership team. Lorna is here, for example. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open this up for people who want to participate as well. But I suppose that starting, first off, Ruth, just to come back to you from the very beginning, you've had the benefit of listening to everything in this room today. What would you say coming away would be the 2 or 3 take-homes that you have heard in terms of the direction of travel?
I mean, it's felt like a very positive session. Like there's a lot of passion in the room for driving change, and I think it's positive that we're all saying similar things. We might have slightly different ideas on some things, but I think there is a real appetite, and I think everyone acknowledged that this is a big challenge that needs wider societal change, and we do need to look across the public, private sectors. And the benefits to everyone will be huge, not just those people experiencing loneliness themselves, but to us as a society. So I think it's really good that we've had that focus on older people, but also everybody kind of realizing, intergenerational friendships and services and things benefit everyone. Loneliness is, a problem across all society, and that can be such a great way for especially older people to feel valued and connected, just putting together those intergenerational services. So I think that will be my takeaway. Oh, you're on mute, Rob.
Thanks for catching that, Ruth. I apologize. So yeah, I was going to say it's the same question I'd like to ask everybody in the panel. So the take-home messages they've got about the direction of travel, where we're going from here. And I was going to come next to Cynthia, actually. Is Cynthia there? Maybe she's having a... Oh, there she is. Yeah. You're on mute. There we are.
Yes. So sorry. So can you repeat the...
Well, I was really interested in, you've heard a lot of the conversations today, and really what for you would you say the take home messages to move forward with? So really that direction of travel moving forward, what are the 2 or 3 things that you take from this session?
Yeah, I think none of them are necessarily things I didn't know before, but I think it's helpful to have them reiterated and for us to kind of keep emphasizing it. So for me, the first is around the power of collaboration and the fact that we need to work together in order to genuinely drive choice, drive innovation, drive personalization into the sorts of solutions that are out there, be it ones that people want to engage with themselves through their communities or through social prescribing, whatever that looks like. I think it's important to do that collaboratively, to ensure also, I think for me, that as I said, the health inequalities that persist in the system don't mean that we exacerbate that kind of health span aspect. And then I think there is something about, and this is partly because this is my world at the moment, there is something about accepting that those that really work has to be the ones that has the ability to scale. I one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about is I've got a portfolio from healthy aging. I'm going to have a portfolio from mindset. I'm going to have another set of portfolio from lots of different investments that we make, driven by very, very sensible agendas and priorities. How do I pull those through such that we have these things in clinic, we have these things out there, on the market being used? I think at the moment it's quite difficult to do that. And I frequently find myself talking to SMEs or charitable sector social ventures who are finding it really, really difficult in the current climate. That kind of route to the clinic is fraught with difficulty. And tailored support to help them do that, and knowing that the system has the absorptive capacity to adopt these things, I think will be really, really important. So that's my 2 things.
Well, I'm going to stick with that comment that you made about the system, and I'm going to go to John. And John, you are running a business. I don't necessarily think that you're somebody who's going to get funded tomorrow by UKRI or Innovate UK necessarily. It's not my point. But as running from a business to delivering a social enterprise as you have, what would you describe as the challenges based on what Cynthia's saying here?
Excuse me. First of all, can you hear me?
Oh, there's a little bit of a problem with your audio.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No? Yeah?
Yes.
Right, put your hand up if right, and let me know if it does. It's a sheep, I'm terribly sorry. And that's why I feel lonely. First of all, if you're running something like Pub is a Hub, where we exist totally on just voluntary donations, the thing is not being scared by what you're doing, but have the fun out of the difference you're making to people's lives. We, from initially June this year, I think we'd had £500 in donations, which keeps you awake a bit at night, especially when you've got your 12 advisors and everything else. And we try and invest about 200 to 300,000 that we raise into projects. And that's why we do try and measure social value. What difference are you really making? And what difference, and it's not me, it's the publican that is the hero in identifying what is needed in that individual local area and going out and doing it and supporting it. And that gives local people confidence of a warm, welcoming environment to go to. It also gives confidence to the publican to engage in local activities like overcoming loneliness and running activities for that. So what we do is say social value is not actually about asset value. It's not about profit. It's about what difference are you making to your local society. And if you believe in that, then you will find that volunteers will follow you. That's where our 12 volunteers come from, because they believe that they're putting something good back into society because it's bringing people together. And we get far more satisfaction, even from a little village store, by a granddad who will walk down each day and buy a pint of milk and buy the local paper, because he's meeting the local mums who are there with the kids, and they'll all have a chat. And that's what we're finding with a lot of the join in Last Orders for Loneliness, is it's bringing people together who wouldn't normally have, they would have been apprehensive about going to the pub. But when they go there, they find that welcoming environment of other people all having similar experiences, who get that inner confidence of feeling that they do matter in their local community. And loneliness, I think partly, this is personal, I think a lot of loneliness is by people more and more feeling that their lives don't matter anymore. either because of the mechanical way that we have to live and conduct ourselves over the internet or phone removes us, either the lack of transport in rural areas or the lack of services. People feel that their local needs are not being taken into account. You suddenly get everybody together and you started to overcome loneliness. You're giving people confidence to believe in their local lives. That's me finished.
Okay, I feel like I would like now to go to Christina. You've been here for the whole session, Christina, and I wonder if you could, you know, and thinking about what everybody else has said, how would you add to this conversation? What are the take-home messages that we should be moving forward with?
Well, that's very profound to ask an academic. It could be a 3-hour seminar for which you would
You've
not be.
You've got a minute.
Yeah, I would say I think we need a more nuanced approach to loneliness and finding out what loneliness, you know, what's the loneliness where we need to intervene and the loneliness where we don't, in a very kind of crude way. And then I think what I would really do is listen to the voices of older people. So what are the times at which they feel lonely and when they would feel help would be appropriate? Because, you know, like my own mother, you know, experienced loneliness, but often around, you know, the dates when my father's birthday and things like that. She didn't really want anybody to do anything, but it was, you know, a sadness mixed with a joy of having had a long and happy marriage. So I think we need to work out, and perhaps older people are the experts by experience. They can tell us about what the characteristics of loneliness that really impairs their ability to function in their community. And allied to that, I think we should talk to them about what the solutions are. It strikes me that a lot of the literature around interventions derives from people like me who live in, you know, who think, you know, giving somebody a dog to pat will, you know, kind of make them feel better. And I think, you know, and I'm sure Age UK does quite a lot of this, actually listen to the people who are the experts and take our lead from them.
Well, I think that's brilliant advice. And with that in mind, I'm going to go to our politician, Fabian. I'm going to give you the last word. And if you can keep it nice and short, we really are running out of time now. But I suppose my question becomes, how can policymakers collaborate with aging business and society? There's a great question on this chat here about where do we go from here with this conversation. There's a whole bunch of on the ground practice that we'd like to show and we need to share as part of our knowledge exchange. Is that something that policymakers can help us with so that everybody has a kind of equal access to the same symmetry of information?
Well, firstly, Rob, you're going to have to forgive me and everybody else because the division bell's just gone. So I've got about a minute and then I will have to go. But look, I think there's 4 areas to me that stand out in terms of practical innovations or policy levers that matter the most. And the first is peer support programs. Befriending and peer support programs run by Age UK and local charities are proven to reduce loneliness in older adults, especially. Now, these programs work best when they're integrated into health and social care teams, ensuring regular contact and emotional support. The second, and others have alluded to this, is digital inclusion. Around 1 in 4 people aged 65 or above in the UK do not use the internet, creating a major barrier to connection. Initiatives like Age UK's Digital Champion programme help older adults develop digital skills and access devices, enabling them to stay connected with family, friends and services. And as you can see myself, I'm over 65. I had trouble logging in this evening, although I use computers every day. The third thing is transport and mobility. Poor transport links are a key driver of loneliness. I've just been in a cycling meeting that I chaired, and it was about how cycling and bicycle hire schemes can be used to connect people, bring them closer together and take them out of loneliness. But there are issues, of course, around that, especially safety and the safety of women in particular. But my government's commitment to improving bus services and active travel options is essential to help older people maintain independence and social contact, as well as keeping fit if they're fit enough to use active travel. And finally, if I may, Rob, intergenerational programs. And I think this is really important. Projects such as the Together Project, Songs and Smile sessions in care homes show how shared activities between young children and older adults can transform lives. And these initiatives reduce age segregation, tackle stereotypes, and create meaningful relationships that strengthen communities. So that's my offering, and I'm going to have to go now and vote in the House of Commons, or the whips will kill me.